Chester, Autumn 914. What had she expected? To fall back into her old life, and be accepted back amongst them? 4 years had passed. It was a wonder that all of her company lived. And yet, though they had been absent from one another for so long, it seemed to Osrith that it had been a mere day or so since they had last met, so easy had it been between them. In the end, Elfrith still had dark hair, with the same flecks of grey. Miral too seemed to have all his colour, and both men must have been in their late 50s. How strange time seemed to be that in some senses moved so quickly and in others was waylaid. Now, there was no time to think of it, as Osrith was crossing the stable with Elfrith, Miral to her right, and was striding down the passageway towards the hall, which was clearly being used by the ruler here, from the richness of the surroundings. Ranked with soldiers, the chair in the centre empty, and Osrith looked from it, searching for her men. To the right of the chair, or throne, Osrith supposed, if it were Ethelflaed's. She saw Elfkin standing beside Angus, the men from Alba beside him, and Osrith's Merson company beside Elfkin. Her heart settled down from its urgent concern that they would not be able to gel. In fact, as she drew nearer, Elfkin, tall, broad and blonde, with what looked like a new scar across his nose, took a slight step towards Oshir, leaving a space for Osrith, and gave her a huge grin. She was about to step into it, but a scraping of stone in front of her caused Osrith to turn. It was Aldhelm. Time had worn more quickly on that man, however. Lines creased his cheeks and forehead, and his once nut brown hair was now paler, as if he had been in the sun. And age had got to the person who now entered, too. No longer dark-haired, Ethelflaed, her neck and head perfectly still in the manner of her father, Alfred of Wessex, could not hide the age on her face and in her hair. Whether she had intended to, Osrith didn't know, although her body was thin and she was clothed from her wrists to her neck, and down to her ankles in a heavy brocade material. Ethelflaed looked straight ahead, and the door closed, her captains, her army, around her, and by her side, Aethelstan. Osrith did not know for sure, and Constantine had not said, but she knew now was the moment. She must establish the limits in which she was working. Did Ethelflaed know that Guthred was dead, for example, and Cumbraland less secure because of it? Dyfnwal claimed half of Cumbraland as the ancient land of though allied with Constantine. Her brother Wihar opposed the king of Strathclyde, and his heir was there, 3 men down from Osrith, learning his craft, meeting people he would meet once again when he was king. Have you been given food? Ethelflaed was blunt, and to the point, looking with her slate-coloured eyes at Osrith, and Osrith was aware that beside her, a fair-haired child, one who had seen her, witnessed her, murder Eadgulf, Edith's brother, for killing a Merson guard, Hayard, for no reason, was staring at her. It could only be Elflad, to whose parentage Osrith could bear witness, for she had been Ethelflaed's guard at the time. Perhaps that was why the Lady of the Mersons had been lenient with her sentence towards Osrith when she had put herself forward for Eadgulf's murder. Had he not been killed, he may now be husband to Elflad, and his crime of murdering Ethelred gone unpunished. Osrith stepped forward of Elfkin, but did not bow. Indeed, she did nothing but reply, one woman to another. Lady of the Mersons she may be, and ruler of these lands. But it was she who had called for the aid of Alba, of the land cold and wild and half-savage, to protect her northern borders, to add to her alliance list. No, lady, Osrith replied. She watched as Ethelflaed raked Alba's nobles with her eyes, and a small start made Osrith realize that she had imagined that Constantine would send far more. Your king has honored us with 4 lords, Ethelflaed said to Osrith. They must be fed. Aldhelm. Ethelflaed turned to her man, who was standing, still and silent beside his lady. Aldhelm, take the good men of Alba to the hall, they must feast before roles are assigned to them. Although Osrith knew we understood English and Saxon, she turned, nevertheless, and spoke in Gaelish to Phelim and Angus. Owain would understand well enough too, for Osrith did not want to betray any Cymric, Western or Northern. In case any of Hywel's men were present, they would know soon enough that the heir to the Strathclydian throne was in the service of the Lady of Mercia. But better to have them on the back foot. The lady has offered you food. and drink. Osrith told them in Gaelish. And whores, she added, winking at Eswi, whose face had turned granite-like at Osrith's words. The three men cheered her words, and Eswi gave her a scolding look, for in Gaelish the words could be interpreted to mean that Ethelfled herself had offered the hospitality of herself, personally. A snort of laughter, quickly stifled, came from the back of the hall. "They are grateful of your hospitality, my lady," Osrith added, as Aldhelm crossed to Eswi, swallowing the shiver of cold that came with hearing the laugh. How many people in Ethelfled's court understood Gaelish, she wondered? How many warriors? Which meant her brother and his men must be there. Which meant that, if it were true that Ragnall was on the land grab, then Sigtryg, his brother, may not be far behind. With Stiora, you must be hungry too, Ethelfled told Osrith when she did not depart with her men. Her mercenaries too had followed Aldhelm, including Miral, much to Osrith's amusement. She turned to the lady, and inclined her head. If Ethelfled thought she was going to get rid of her that easily, Osrith thought, it wouldn't work. She was here to fulfill an oath. 2 oaths. "I hear you had your child, and that he is well," Ethelfled said, not moving nor even blinking. A change of tactic, thought Osrith, to put her off. "Good try, your ladyship. I owe Mercia 2 years. My king owes its lady swords because of the agreement between our two lands," Osrith replied, stating the bald facts. "I came because King Constantine asked me." End of story. "Is Aldhelm still head of your armies?" "Aldhelm," Ethelfled told her, "and other lords, who have come to my aid." Osrith wondered, later, when she was staring off to the west, picking out the coast of the Wirulum that was dotted with tiny fire glows of Norse camps, why she had not chosen to attack Osrith by mentioning, "the Lord Utard, or your brother." Osrith would, and did. "Your brother is in East Anglia, reclaiming the east of Mercia to its throne," Osrith told her, keeping her eyes on Ethelfled, not wanting to catch Ethelstan's eye. If Ethelfled was ignorant of Osrith's knowledge of West Saxon land liberation, she did not say. Nor did she give in to Osrith's barb. The land was Mercian, and had she been a king of Mercia, the land would be hers. It was hers, in reality, and Osrith's distinction petty. But Osrith had little else in her defensive line against the woman who would bring her down if she could. "Aldhelm will command you and your men," Ethelfled tried again. "I will command my men once I have spoken with Lord Aldhelm," Osrith corrected. "And I shall be shown the ramparts." She saw with pleasure Ethelfled flinch. Stipa had once said that a true commander stood beside his men, did the lowliest work to show them that he was not afraid to get his hands dirty. The walls? If Ethelfled was trying to conceal her amazement, she had failed. "You wish to patrol the walls, Lady of the Mercians?" Osrith told Ethelfled. "What do you suppose King Constantine meant by sending a mere 5 warriors to aid with the incoming tide of Norse? We are not many in number, we are much in battle experience. Engus, for example, has spent many years keeping Harold Finehair out of Pitland. Eswi is a diplomat in Caligulad and Felim the same in the Western Isles. I have strategists," Ethelfled told her, dismissively. "Then I will leave you to your Northmen," Osrith told her, turning to the door. "I will explain to my king that our services were not needed by the Lady of the Mercians." She took a few steps towards it, then turned and added, "Please send my men to the gates once they have partaken of your generosity." Again, a stifled laugh. "Lady Osrith," Ethelfled called to her, suddenly, and with enough haste to tell Osrith that she was desperate for them to stay for some particular reason. "I see no reason you should patrol the walls. Please," and here Ethelfled's words softened, "accept food and milk for yourself, to sustain you on your night's vigil." It had worked. Of course it had worked. Whatever Ethelfled had thought would come of their tripartite alliance, of Mercia, Strathclyde and Pitland, their presence was not it. But she could not be seen to rebuke Constantine's fulfillment of that alliance when she had called for it. She had to make do with what she had, and what she had was a belligerent Osrith, 3 generals and a prince, a hostage by any other name, in the form of Owain, given in the spirit of alliance and that could be, theoretically, put to death if the alliance was broken. "Lady," Osrith nodded, and turned, striding out of the hall, half expecting to be called back with more instructions or rebukes. "Osrith, you are as terrible as ever," came a voice as she neared the end of the passageway which led out into Cester's courtyard. There was only one person who spoke to her like that, Aldhelm, who was standing at the entrance and watching her survey the bare walls that were being refortified. "This way to the walls that overlook the west?" Osrith asked, nodding towards wooden platforms that served as a ladder up to the old rampart. "Osrith," Aldhelm chided, "it's good to see you, but you don't have to do this. You must have had a long ride, you will need to rest. I will need to patrol your walls, and assess the situation, Aldhelm," she told him. "Besides, I would not be able to sleep knowing that I am not fulfilling my duty to my king." Aldhelm inhaled, and then gave her another rebukeful look. "You can do nothing without rest," he told her. "I must put myself into a position where I can learn what I can to defend the city. Is that not what you need?" "It is," Aldhelm admitted. "I will go alone." And without a backwards glance, and with time and space to think and clear her head, to prepare for a role that she had not anticipated, Osrith, future Lady of Berwick, fixed her eyes west, on the Norse. 88,888,888. Osrith moved with the guard, as they rotated their places around the ramparts. It was an old guard trick which was particularly effective on a burh. Keeping watch was an effortful business, which is why 2 guards were placed at each station, for company, so that the same area was watched twice, and so the guards watched one another. They would be guards of different companies, often men who didn't know one another. Rather than any prior agreement to loyalty, their focus was the loyalty to their lord. And Osrith would have liked company, as the sun sank over Ireland and the temperature dropped. As a column of guard were brought through the western gates and replaced by another, in an almost hypnotic manner. But she needed the space, to think, to plan. The Norse were sailing up the Merse and into the western land that belonged either to Cumbraland or to Northumbria. Either way, whoever claimed that land was having it invaded by the Northmen who had been expelled from the east coast of Irion. By whom? It could only be Flansinna. Clearly he had become strong enough to unite some of the Irish families to one cause and push the Norse from the land they had taken. Dublin was favourite, where the Norse had found a good stretch of river to land their longboats and winter year after year. The southern Uineal had clearly found their strength from somewhere to get their land back. So the Norse had to come somewhere, and here was the somewhere, a place with few fortifications, where 3 kingdoms' borders lay within 10 miles of one another, where a large body of water could shelter many hundreds of boats, and the Norse and their families could stay, dormant, in that coast, until they were ready to move. But to where? There could be only one move. While we looked north to Constantine to defend Bibbenberg, there was no king, no lord, defending Eofork that Osrith knew. Was that why Uhtred was there? Was he defending the land in the north? He was the lord of Dunham, inheriting it from Ragnar, his adopted brother. But did he command enough men to defend south of that fortress? Eofork was a prize, and it was weak. That was surely where Agnol would be heading. And Bryda. For Bryda had gone to Irion, and the more Osrith thought about it, the more it made sense that a brain like hers would come up with a plan to take Eofork. As Osrith ran the idea through her mind again, the more it made sense. And she took the thought with her as she moved with the guard, first northwest and then north, then to the east, facing the sun as it promised morning on the horizon. It was then that Osrith heard the song, a song with some notes in some order, the same one that Finan was singing the night she had followed her brother back to his home in Winchester, all those years before. Had she not known it, Osrith would not have thought it was the same song. And its badly sung notes were sailing up from the streets below. "Guard!" she called, to the man leaning with over the balustrade, staring down, bored, into the street below. He straightened up and stared into the darkness. Osrith strode over to him calling, "What's your name? Who's your commander?" Heribald, the man replied, stirred out of a stupor, confessing his company as he woke up. "Heribald?" Osrith repeated. "Is that you or your commander?" "My see," he began, then peered at Osrith. "Wait. What are you? Never mind who I am, or what I am doing. Osrith told him. Guarding better than you, she added. And if you do not wish me to find Heribald and tell him that you were asleep, and ignored the gales below, go ahead and fight me, she added, looking at the semi-withdrawn blade. Put it away, boy, and guard my section of the wall and I'll see to the gales. As he passed, Osrith pushed the man in the small of the back, and he stumbled towards the wooden wall section that she had been standing in. You, Osrith added, to the man who was paired with him. Tell Hayard that Osrith of Mercia has reorganized your guard. Then dipped her head towards him. Keep him awake, for God's sake, or there might be more intruders. And with one look up to the wall, watching both men cover the section from the western gate to level with the hall, Osrith hurried down to street level, where more words were being sung, badly, and echoed shortly afterwards and out of time by another voice. Where are you? Osrith cried, in Gaelish, and then in Northern Cymric, trying to locate them. 2 streets away, she estimated. The singing came again, and she tore past more guards until she found the 4 of them, staggering along the road. 3 of them were staggering. One, however, was trying to keep them together, darting from one side and then the other, like a sheepdog trying to keep a flock together. As Osrith ran to them, he turned, and she saw Eswi's urgent face. She wiped her forehead and used her thumb to wipe over her eyes. Eswi, she called, her heart sinking as her most trusted of Constantine's men gave her a defeated look. Get them to bed, all of them, Osrith told them, and glared at Phelim when, on seeing her, cheered and tried to draw her in for a hug. Phelim, Osrith said crossly, not in Gaelish but in their native Pictish. You must get to your beds. Can you help Eswi with Angus, who was more drunk than anyone, and had stumbled towards some poles being used to support part of the ramparts of the bear that was not yet finished. Phelim put out an arm, but Angus careered forwards and fell over. And this way to the stables, Osrith instructed, pointing towards where she, Miral and Elfrith had conversed, briefly, tersely but ultimately warmly earlier that evening. The prince needs his rest if he is to go on duty later this evening. Phelim, looking up from the fallen Angus, rested his eyes on Owain. And have you slept, Osrith? You offered yourself for guard duty? Eswi's words were soft, and to the point. I have not, Osrith told him. I needed to get my bearings, I need to watch again in the day. She broke off as she watched Angus get to his feet. She said, we all need to get to bed, Phelim told Angus. When he mumbled Osrith's name, he broke into a huge grin, which was accompanied by a belch as he tried to laugh heartily at something. What? Osrith shouted at Phelim. What? She tried again, turning to Eswi, who glanced away. Owain definitely needs to go to bed, Phelim stuttered, helping Angus onto his own shoulder. Worn out? Worn out? Osrith rounded on the teenager, and folded her arms. But Owain did not get a chance to say anything because Angus had put out a long finger, and wagged it at Osrith. You said to indulge in the whores, girl, Angus put in, plaintively, as a Phelim got him upright, and he looked at his fellow lad. You did, Phelim added, nodding, his eyes closing and then opening. You did, Osrith, soon-to-be wife of Sainidui Alpin. Osrith felt herself blush for a moment as her betrothed's name came to her ears. Since she had arrived at Cester she had barely thought of him. I did, Osrith agreed, and added, you took Owain to a whore? It had meant to be light-hearted, a joke, for surely even they, in their drunken state, would not be so stupid. An awkward silence passed. Osrith, Angus said to her, his words slow and careful, when we were here last, you recommended her. I? Osrith asked, a pool of dread beginning to form in her stomach. I recommended a whore? You recommended a little mouse, and oh, I do believe Owain loved that little mouse, went on Angus. Osrith dared to look at Eswi's face and the truth was written all over his features. An Luch, Angus confirmed. The mouse. Owain gave a soft smile of contentment. A prostitute? Mus? Father Leofstan's wife. And Owain? He was barely a man. What could they be thinking of? But of course, he was nearly a man, more nearly than Constantine had been when he had taken Osrith for the first time. That awkward in and out that he had done before Osrith knew what was what. Some boys were married at 12, she added to her own thoughts. Owain, mid-teens, might well be behind other boys at his age. Was Mess that night the first time he had been with a woman? We got into a fight, added Phelim, showing her Angus's hand where it had been hit by the side of a blade. A bruise was forming. Go and sleep it off, she told them, walking swiftly as they trudged beside her. Where are the Mersons? All around, said Phelim, in Pictish, as they passed a group of people making their way towards the west gate. Why do Mersons look over their shoulder? But Osrith ignored him, and gestured to the stables. We did not come here to get steaming drunk. She told him. Where are the Mersons? Our Mersons? Elfkin, Miral, Oshir, Falkburg, Egelfrith. They went back to quarters, Eswe replied, looking sheepish. I am sorry, Osrith. I lost them when they met up with some other lords. I spent the night looking for them. Get them up the loft if possible. Let as few people who can see, she told him, striding on, and continuing in Pictish and Gaelish. One small mercy is that nearly no one spoke either of those languages. Small mercy, she told herself. Damn well will be the end of Constantine's delegation if Ethelfled knows the lords, and Prince Owain have been on the piss, she told Eswe, as he flung open the stable door. A few horses snuffled, suggesting the crash of the door had woken them. Go, said Eswe, to Owain, bundling him through the door. Come on. He beckoned to Phelim, who was still shouldering Angus. He didn't like it, said Phelim, in Gaelish, turning his head towards Osrith as he went in. Who? Shouted back Osrith, as she watched them stumble over tussocks of hay towards the loft ladder. Who didn't like it? The man who Angus fought. Phelim called back, happily. Osrith groaned inwardly. Oh, this gets worse and worse. And, with all the patience she could muster, Osrith called back, who did Angus fight? She asked, as they disappeared up into the hay loft, as Osrith had requested. She trod the hay behind two sleepy horses and called up, Phelim, Angus. But it was no use. At least they were up there. Osrith was turning to go when a voice called back down to her. Mersons, called back Owain. Mersons look over their shoulder to see the battlefield. Osrith stopped and stared at the loft hatch, before racing up the rungs herself, pulling herself up, weary-limbed, as the morning sun lit upon their drunken faces. Tell me you didn't say that here? She asked. Please, just tell me you didn't suggest that Mersons were war cowards. And then he hit Angus, and Angus hit him back. And then another drew a sword, and Angus drew his. Owain was grinning himself now. Or was that the post-kosher happy rush to the head? Never trust Owain with a secret, Osrith told herself, bitterly, for he will share it after a few sups. They came across Utad and his men. Came a voice from below. Osrith peered back down and saw it was Aldhelm, looking up, clearly concerned. And Osrith looked into the face of a man whose voice of direct reason always came to Osrith when she was in a crisis, like ice from a waterfall. My men stopped the fight. Good, Osrith told him. Eswe, get them to bed. Aldhelm, can you help? And where is the rest of my company? She added, climbing down the loft ladder. She was about to ignore, or sneer at Aldhelm's hand, extended out to help her. Osrith took it and gave him a brief smile. Asleep, Aldhelm told her. Or, probably just rising. Well, that's half of them had some sense, Osrith groaned, and then looked at Aldhelm or had good leadership and discipline. Which is what she was concerned about with her men from Alba. She was in charge of them, Osrith, and this was a perfect excuse for Ethelfled to send them back to Constantine in ignominy. Take me to them, she told Aldhelm, before calling back up to Eswe to tell him she would be wanting them ready after midday. I will, said Aldhelm, as long as you promise you will go to bed yourself. 88,888,888. What Aldhelm was saying to her, as Eswe had himself, was that she needed her rest so she could go on. And they were right. But too many thoughts were racing round Osrith's head for her to stop until she got some answers to questions, namely the Norse, how long they had been flooding in, and the identity of any. We believe you are right, Osrith, Aldhelm told her as she made her way with him to the guardroom, met with the Mersons, guard duty, had spoken to Aldhelm about her supposition. It is possible, more than possible. But nothing is happening, and the longer it takes to happen, the less prepared we will be. Agreed, Osrith told him. Tell me of Irian, Ireland. What do we know of the leadership there? Do we know why they have been so successful? Not entirely, Aldhelm told her. But something has united the tribes and enabled them to cooperate. We get a lot of our intelligence through Hywel's men, though they have mentioned no change in the identity of the High King. So Flancina still held power there, Osrith thought, and her mind settled on Domhnall for a moment. Domhnall and Little Neil, who could, perhaps, be cooperating with Flann for the benefit of all the Irish. For there seemed little end to the Norse coming up the Merse, or settling in their boats on the north bank of the Willam. Bring Elfkin and men, Osrith asked. I need to see them, if I am indeed to be their captain, along with my own men. That is the lady's intention, Aldhelm told Osrith. She does not intend bitterness. She is desperately trying to protect her realm on a spot which is both difficult to put up defenses, as well as try to come up with a refusion strategy. Is she? Asked Osrith. It does not look as if she is doing very much at all. What is the thinking behind doing nothing, Aldhelm? And regretted her harshness when the man glanced down briefly. It is the advice of Lord Utard, Aldhelm told her. Watch and wait, see what they will do. Do they need to reach Eothwick before we act? Osrith asked of him, and enjoyed for a moment the shock in his eyes. Eothwick, yes, so that was the plan, the prize. The Norse and Danes all revered Eothwick. They told their children stories of the Promised Land, their spiritual capital, one of places they had captured decades before, and had failed to hold on to. Come on, Aldhelm told her. The men are practicing with the other warriors in the courtyard. You may come to them. 88,888,888. Osrith did more than come to them. Standing at the front of the courtyard, she called her men to her, and Osrith led them back to the little area behind the stable yard, so she could address them privately. As they walked, Aldhelm leaving them to go, Elfrith and Miral to either sides of them. The latter leaned across to Osrith and grinned. Your men, your Albul lords, he asked. Sleeping off the night? Sleeping off the night, Osrith echoed. Indulged in too much wine and food? Elfrith asked. Osrith recognized the tone and turned to her friend. Tell me, just tell me, and I can then get on with my job, she told him. He fought with one of Utard's men, Elfrith told her. One who he exchanged what sounded like Gaelish with as he fought, blade on blade. It could only be Finan. Who else could speak Gaelish? Who else could Angus have found who spoke his native language and had temper enough? Not that they were fighting over Osrith. She was not that self-indulgent to think that. But there would be animosity towards anyone from the Dulriatan nobility, as there always had been whenever anyone had mentioned Irian and its people. Osrith shook her head, and then went to stand in front of her Mercian men. After calling over Elfkin, who had previously commanded them all, Elfrith and Miral watching to one side, she noticed their eyes drift to the stable again. I need you to be my eyes. I need you to watch the land, Osrith told them, after allowing an informal welcome by each one, claps on the back and words of welcome, comments about her return to civilization. Something is being planned by the Northmen, and I want to know what it is. You, and Constantine's men, she continued, the plan coming to her mind, half-formed, in pieces, but rapidly dissolving into a picture she could see. We have fought together before. I have commanded you all before. Whatever the Lady Ethelfled has planned, it will be too slow, too difficult to act with swiftness. I am your captain, Elfkin your deputy, she told them. Aldhelm had already briefed them, so it wasn't news, and they were aware of the presence of Eswi, Engus and Felim, and Prince Owain. More than aware, it was likely they showed them the way to the alehouses and the whorehouses, waiting for the inevitable. And, when I know what the enemy plans, and how they are going to worm their way into our land. Osrith glanced at each one in turn. She saw Falkburg, stoic and steady, who followed orders to the letter, and fought with heart and might. She saw Egelfrith, wily and agile, who could be behind an enemy before he knew it. Oshir was reliable, and could think for himself. His lip curled in glee as Osrith's eye caught his. Oshir, and the rest, all knew Osrith was a captain they could trust, and would lead them to glory. Glory, Osrith declared, as Miral and Elfrith stood either side of her and Elfkin. We will get at the Norse and drive them away. We will be the first, before the other companies, back here at Cester before they've even left. Her men roared, raising swords, as was the custom. And then she set about organizing the watch. Oshir and Falkberg on the first watch in the afternoon, a swap with Eglfrith and Elfkin. Come with me, she told Miral and Elfrith, nodding to the stable. I need a few hours to sleep, and when I get back, I will have Constantine's warriors. I need you to be with me on the rampart. I need you to watch. What for? Miral asked. What are you hoping to see, Osrith? And Osrith glanced to the west, and gave a satisfied smile. Their mistake, she told him and Elfrith. One of our company will see it, and we will attack.